we have a major update. The story we have been bringing you since day one, Nolan Wells' death.
Nolan Wells never got the chance to explain what happened on Horn Island. And after nearly a month of searching, investigating, and speculating, it turns out almost no one else fully can either. This morning, word broke that the official, state-run autopsy into his death is finally complete.
The autopsy into the death investigation of 18-year-old Nolan Wells is complete, but the findings will not be made public yet. The autopsy was conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. It's now going to be presented to a grand jury. Meanwhile, civil rights attorney Ben Crump joined the parents of Nolan Wells Thursday at the National Urban League Conference in Nashville. They are demanding answers about Wells' death during that July 4th boating trip off the Gulf Coast, where Wells traveled with friends to Horn Island but did not return with the group. His body was found 2 days later. Wells' parents say conflicting accounts and missing details have deepened their concerns.
The single piece of evidence everyone following this case has been waiting weeks for. But if you're expecting this story to end today, it won't. Completing an autopsy and revealing what it actually found turn out to be two very different things, and the space between them has become the defining mystery of one of the most closely watched death investigations in the country right now.
Just know we will not be distracted. We are ready to do whatever we need to do as his parents to continue advocating for him, because Nolan is not here. He is not here to speak for himself. He is not here to tell us what happened. So again, we will not rest until we get answers.
If you're following this case too, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And go ahead and subscribe, because this is a story we'll keep tracking as it develops in real time. Because right now, the honest answer to the only question that actually matters, what happened to Nolan Wells, is still nobody outside a small circle of investigators fully knows. And today's headline, despite how it reads, doesn't change that. It just moves the goalposts one more time.
Thanks for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. Once again, we do want to continue on with some of our top stories that we're following from this week. And the latest information we have in the Nolan Wells investigation, putting this up on your screen courtesy of our partners there at TMZ. We now have new information that the official autopsy in the death of Nolan Wells has been completed. This is according to officials familiar with the investigation. Results from the State Medical Examiner's Office have not yet been made public at this time, but are expected to be sent to a grand jury. It was back on July 23rd that the Office of the District Attorney confirmed that the autopsy report of Nolan Wells' death will be withheld until a grand jury can review it. And so to talk a little bit more about what we're watching here in this case, as it has now made national headlines, I'd like to bring into the conversation now legal analyst Jeremy Rosenthal. Jeremy, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks for having me, Christina.
Absolutely. And so I'm glad you took the time to speak to us, as we're still getting updates pretty much daily here on this Nolan Wells investigation. But this newest information that the official autopsy has been completed. Again, those findings not yet public, but how critical is this piece of information and that documentation that is now going to be presented to a grand jury?
Critical. If anytime you want to prosecute somebody for a crime, especially homicide, you start with the cause of death, because homicide or any type of murder charge is going to be that one person caused the death of another person. So the first thing that you have to establish is that the death was caused. If a death is accidental, that doesn't mean that there's no criminal responsibility. It could be manslaughter or criminally negligent homicide, but you have to start with what went wrong and what happened. And unless or until we know the answers to that, we're really sort of multiplying zeros, if you will. So much of the complications in this case are that it is a blank canvas. We have so many more questions than we do have answers here. And so there's a tendency for people to sort of fill in the gaps with their own sort of pre-existing worldviews, opinions, and things like that. So we start once we get the autopsy, at a minimum, I don't know that we'll establish anything, but hopefully we can eliminate at least certain certain causes of death and then maybe start to sort of move this forward, whether it turns into a criminal investigation, whether not. Hopefully, at least it provides some answers for everybody, especially the family.
Absolutely. And so I want to talk about the family here because they've been very outspoken, not only on social media, but holding several press conferences as well throughout the last few weeks since the death of Nolan earlier this month. But one of the critical pieces of information that we've gotten from the family is that they've conducted their own independent autopsy and are starting to look into this and his death on their own. How critical is it that we're able to compare the results of what the official autopsy is compared to the one that the state is going to eventually release?
It never hurts to have more eyes on these things, and we should hopefully get some more answers out of it. Not only that, what we want to make sure of is that any investigation is really not slanted, but we also have an adversarial system of justice. So if an investigation does try to prove something, I mean, that's the scientific method, isn't it? You make a hypothesis and then you try to support that hypothesis. So more information is certainly our friend. You're never going to have the resources that the government has, even though there's some big names that are sort of getting involved here to help the Wells family. But again, the more the merrier. Information, I think, is everybody's ally here. And like I said, the more information that we can sort of put in this case and paint in, the more information that we have, the more that sort of defangs or declaws a lot of the conspiracies that I think that we hear and frankly that we're going to keep hearing in this situation.
And speaking of some of those conspiracies, of course, if you've been online at all, if you're on X, if you're on Instagram, seems like all social media platforms have really been inundated with information as it's coming out, some of that accurate, some of it not. And so when it comes to talking about criminal charges, of course, the court of public opinion seemingly has charged several people in connection to the death of Nolan Wells. But what is the real legal standard for wanting to get that information across the bar in order to bring criminal charges from the state's perspective?
I mean, you're going to have to figure out who broke the law. The way that any type of criminal case works is the government is charged with proving elements of a case. They've got to prove 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and those are provided by the penal code, either state or federal. So the law is listed out that, again, I mean, if you take a speeding case, you have to prove that a specific person was in a car and that they were going in an excessive rate of speed. Murder, homicide, things like this are no different. You have to be able to hit all of those points. And when you just have a mystery, a lot of times theories and opinions just aren't evidence. Now, if there's anything here that's actionable, if you talk about the destruction of evidence, if you're talking about deleting Snapchats, if you're talking about deleting text messages and things like that, you're getting closer to something that's actionable. You have to figure out who did that, and that's going to be hard, especially given my understanding is that it was Nolan Wells' phone where some of these things disappeared from. So who grabbed the phone and did what to it? That's a really, really hard thing to establish. So far, everybody's denying having done something like that, and it's really hard to prove that. Even with some of the audio that I think has been released, even that is very, very difficult to decipher. And even if you could decipher it, does it really? Who does it point to, right? And so it's very, again, we just have a lot of questions here.
Absolutely. And so we're just showing some video of, this is courtesy of TMZ, some of the audio that has been talked about and circulating on the internet as well. And so, Jeremy, I also want to talk about the high profile nature of this case. We've been seeing a lot from the family, which we've mentioned several times, but it was in fact just this week that a man was arrested in California. This is in connection with making threats against the Jackson County judge, who is the mother of a friend of Nolan Wells. And so this is a 27-year-old man from Sacramento who's currently in custody on the allegation that he sent a death threat to Cole via Facebook Messenger. He said this, quote, "It's going to blow you away when you see it. Once that package is opened, the timer will start. And then you have maybe 10 seconds or less to ask God for forgiveness." Of course, very scary that we're hearing that some of these death threats are being sent to people in connection with this case. These are family members of both the victim and, of course, the people who are connected and the friends of Nolan Wells. When it comes to the high-profile nature of this, is this something that happens a lot when you see the media covering a specific case?
This is a high-profile, emotional situation, and it's one where the narrative about race is certainly gaining momentum. We saw very recently in Texas the Carmelo Anthony case, and there was just the same issues. You know, a lot of times when you have a high-profile story, when there's a lot more questions than answers, it brings out a lot of emotion, and you get some weirdos that sort of take it on themselves to threaten people and do things like that. Certainly, you know, we hope that doesn't happen, and if it does happen, you know, you hope that those folks are brought to justice. And anything that happens like that takes away, I think, from the pain that the Wells family is feeling here. And it takes away from the victim and their search for the truth. And their truth has has everything to do with what happened on Horn Island that day, and who saw things or didn't see things, you know, who was around. You got a lot of questions there, and certainly you don't want anything that another individual does to detract from that. I don't think any of us are going to be shocked if we see more and more of these types of stories. Hopefully not. But again, these things can be very emotionally charged. And, you know, the authorities and the family need folks to kind of give the thing some space so they can get to the truth.
And so, Jeremy, I want to ask you this before I let you go. I think a lot of the conversation that has only been happening for folks who are on the outside looking into this case want to know this. Why were investigators initially saying that they did not suspect foul play? I think that's a question that a lot of our viewers have had, that they've even emailed me and messaged me on Instagram wondering that about this case.
Well, you've got an area that my understanding is sort of, you know, that a lot of what happened in this case kind of fell between the cracks, really, of jurisdictions. There was a very delayed response here, and there's a lot of finger pointing from one governmental agency to the other. I think it's safe to assume that there's not a lot of experience with some of the entities that are involved here. These are very high-profile situations and tragic deaths, things like that. So a lot of times this might be an agency's first time dealing with it. So it just may be that they spoke out of turn. It may be that they sort of leapt before they looked at it. It may be that they just didn't think it through before they made that announcement. I would suspect that the answer has got to do with probably the size of the agencies that are involved, and it doesn't sound like they deal with these types of emergencies too often.
Absolutely. Well, still more questions than answers at this point. Legal analyst Jeremy Rosenthal here to help us break it down. Jeremy, any final thoughts before I let you go? What else are you kind of looking out for in the next few days and weeks as bits and pieces of information are starting to leak out?
Well, we've got the autopsy. The autopsy results are not released, and they may not be released. You know, it's a double-edged sword. The more information the public gets, in some ways, it's worse. Hopefully not. Hopefully more answers are better. You've also got, in this situation, you've got a body that was exposed to the elements for some time, and that's certainly going to have an impact. I think that's going to have an impact on any kind of toxicology and any type of autopsy. So the answer, I think, is going to be more vague than folks are going to like. I doubt very highly that we'll see a smoking gun here, but you never know. And like I said, if somebody did something wrong here, I think we'd all like to see something happen about it. But that's the problem when you have something that's such a mystery on so many levels, is that we all just sort of tend to plug our own values into things and draw our own conclusions that are sort of convenient but uninformed.
And letting the legal process play out will be a major part of us learning a bit more about what happened there on the day that Nolan Wells dies. But we appreciate Jeremy Rosenthal, as always, for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Your expertise at this time is always appreciated.
Thanks, Christina. Have a great day.
You too. Wanted to bring that to you here on Live Now from Fox. Before we slide away for our final 2-minute commercial break, I want to put this up on your screen. We have this via TMZ, yet another update in this case. And so we do know that the United Cajun Navy, according to TMZ, has been working on Nolan Wells' case since his disappearance. And now they're sharing all the information that they've gathered with his family and Mississippi authorities. And so ultimately what we're learning here is that Brian Thrasher, the United Cajun Navy VP, talked to TMZ saying that the organization is sending a full report of its findings to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the DA, and Nolan's family. He went on to say that, quote, since we have been involved with the initial search, we have also been getting hundreds of tips, which we have sifted through and compiled a report of our findings. The findings do not implicate anyone or anything and is solely meant as an investigative tool and not meant to draw a conclusion. End quote. We're also told that the United Cajun Navy report includes a timeline plus timestamp photos from tips which came in through their website, direct messages, emails, and much more. All of this, though, of course, comes just 2 days after Dr. Benjamin Hudson, the father of Nolan Wells' best friend, Warren Hudson, told TMZ that their family is also offering now a $50,000 reward for any information that leads to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible for his death.
According to officials familiar with the investigation, the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office has completed its official autopsy of Nolan Wells. That much is confirmed. What isn't confirmed, and may not be for some time, is anything the autopsy actually found. Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath addressed this directly in a video statement released back on July 23rd, explaining that under her office's long-standing practice, virtually every death in the county that isn't attributed to natural causes or a routine traffic accident is presented to a grand jury before any of it becomes public. She was careful to note this isn't a special rule invented for this case. It's how death investigations in Jackson County have been handled throughout her entire career. It's a policy built for consistency, not secrecy. But consistency lands very differently in a case that has already drawn national headlines, high-profile legal advocacy, and around-the-clock speculation than it does in a quiet case that never makes the evening news at all. For a family that has spent weeks demanding transparency, and a public that has spent weeks demanding answers, today's update amounts to this: the science is finished. The story is not. For anyone unfamiliar with how this actually works, a grand jury isn't a trial, and it isn't public. It's a closed-door process where a group of ordinary citizens reviews evidence presented by prosecutors and decides only one narrow question: whether there's enough evidence to formally charge someone with a crime. There's no defense attorney in the room, no cross-examination, and historically, no guarantee that the proceedings or the evidence behind them ever become fully public, regardless of the outcome. In high-profile cases like this one, that secrecy tends to frustrate everyone involved, the family included, even though it exists specifically to protect the integrity of whatever comes next. It means that even once a grand jury reviews Nolan Wells' autopsy findings, there's no guarantee the public learns what's actually inside that report anytime soon, only whether the jury decided someone should face charges because of it. To really understand why that matters, it helps to remember that this was never a single autopsy story. It was always two, running in parallel almost from the beginning. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind has said there were no immediately obvious signs of trauma on Nolan's body when it was recovered. But given the uncertain circumstances of his disappearance, Lind's office asked the state medical examiner to conduct a full forensic autopsy anyway, specifically so investigators could determine, one way or another, whether any foul play had occurred. That official autopsy took place on July 7th, one day after Nolan's identity was confirmed through dental records. But Nolan's parents made a decision early on that would come to define the case just as much as anything law enforcement has done. They had their son's body flown out of Mississippi entirely, to Washington, D.C., specifically so a pathologist with no ties whatsoever to local law enforcement could conduct a fully independent examination of their son's remains. That pathologist, Dr. Roger Mitchell, delivered his findings roughly 2.5 weeks later, at a press conference held not in Mississippi, but on the sidelines of an NAACP convention in Chicago. His conclusion was its own kind of cliffhanger. Manner and cause of death, he said, remained undetermined pending further investigation, not the clean answer the family or anyone else had been hoping for. Attorney Ben Crump went a step further that day, saying the independent findings could not rule out whether some non-accidental factor had contributed to Nolan's death. That's not confirmation of wrongdoing. It's not exoneration of anyone either. It's simply another open question, stacked on top of all the others already sitting there. And even that chapter isn't fully closed today. Dr. Mitchell is reportedly still working to obtain tissue from Nolan's throat, tissue that, for reasons that haven't been made public, wasn't available during his original independent exam, along with additional photographs taken closer to the actual moment Nolan's body was found on the shoreline. In other words, even the family's own hand-picked pathologist doesn't consider his work finished. 2 autopsies, 2 teams of experts, 2 separate conclusions of, essentially, we don't know yet. And as of tonight, neither has produced anything resembling a public answer. The clearest picture of where this investigation actually stands didn't come out of Mississippi at all. It came the day before today's autopsy news, in Nashville, Tennessee, where Ben Crump and members of his legal team stood before reporters at the National Urban League's annual conference and walked through, piece by piece, everything they say remains unresolved. One detail stood out immediately. Crump revealed that his team is now working with oceanic engineering experts to answer a question that has quietly troubled this case from the very beginning. How and why was Nolan's body recovered in almost the exact location where he was last seen alive, roughly 2 full days later? On an island shaped by shifting currents and unpredictable tides, a body simply staying in place for 2 days isn't necessarily suspicious on its own. But it isn't nothing either. And Crump made clear his team intends to find out precisely what the water itself might still be able to tell investigators that human witnesses, so far, haven't. It's the kind of detail that sounds small until you actually sit with it. Not proof of anything, just one more thread in a case full of them that hasn't been fully pulled yet. Standing beside their attorney that day were Nolan's parents, Christine Wells Wansley and Elmore Wansley. It's easy, a month into a national news story, to lose sight of the fact that at the very center of it all is still just a mother and a father who lost their 18-year-old son. Elmore addressed, directly and publicly, the wave of hostility the family says they've faced simply for speaking out, asking plainly where the empathy had gone. Christine's message was more direct still, that anyone with information at all, friends or strangers, needed to come forward, because the family will not rest until they have real, verifiable answers about what happened to their son. It was, notably, the very same press conference where Crump chose to place Nolan's case publicly alongside 2 others his firm currently represents. The deaths of Daniel Irving and Tyler Smith, 2 other 18-year-old black men who died within roughly 3 months of Nolan, under entirely separate circumstances of their own. To be clear, Crump has not claimed these 3 cases are connected by anything beyond the family's shared search for accountability, and no investigator in any of the 3 cases has suggested such a link either. But the pairing on that stage was deliberate and impossible to miss. 3 young men, 3 grieving families, 1 attorney, asking the same fundamental question 3 separate times over. Underneath the press conferences and the public statements, a quieter fight has been playing out for weeks over something almost mundane by comparison: a cell phone. Early in the investigation, Nolan's mother said she noticed something that troubled her. His phone appeared to be missing Snapchat activity from the very day he disappeared, along with location data that, in her own words, simply didn't add up. That concern became a formal part of the case on July 15th, when Crump, attorney Eric Hertz, and the family sat down directly with District Attorney McElrath. Crump would later describe it as a respectful meeting, and it produced what sounded, at the time, like real progress. An agreement, in principle, that investigators from both sides would conduct a mutual, joint inspection of Nolan's phone, so that everyone involved could see the same data at the same time. Hertz, at that same meeting, said something worth remembering: that whenever a case this large explodes into the news, people on every side of it, investigators, commenters, strangers online, tend to construct narratives faster than the facts can actually support them, and that the real job of his team was cutting through that noise to find the truth, not adding to it. 2 weeks later, at that same Nashville press conference, Hertz gave an update on where that agreement actually stood. And the honest answer was, still not finalized. He said the legal team was working toward what he called a tentative agreement with the district attorney's office to jointly investigate not just Nolan's phone, but other phones connected to people involved in the case as well, alongside county investigators and, by his account, the FBI. Subpoenas, meanwhile, have reportedly already gone out to several major platforms, including Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, TikTok, and the location-sharing app Life360, seeking whatever data still exists tied to Nolan's accounts. Preservation letters have gone out to friends who were on that boat trip and their families, formally instructing them not to delete anything, on the grounds that litigation is, in the careful language attorneys use, reasonably anticipated. Nearly 4 weeks after that first meeting produced an agreement in principle, the actual joint inspection still hasn't happened. Whatever those phones eventually show, both sides seem to agree it could be significant. Neither side has fully explained why it's taken this long to actually look. That kind of caution matters, because this case hasn't stayed contained to courtrooms, press conferences, and cell phone subpoenas. It's also become genuinely dangerous for the people standing anywhere near it. Court records show a man from California was recently arrested after allegedly sending a specific, violent threat over social media, directed at a Mississippi judge, a woman with no official role whatsoever in the criminal investigation itself, targeted, it appears, only because her own child happens to be friends with people connected to Nolan. State officials have publicly said they're actively cracking down on threats made in connection with this investigation, which tells you something about how far the temperature around this case has climbed in just a few weeks. It's worth sitting with that for a moment, because it says something uncomfortable about what happens when a true crime case explodes into national news the way this one has. The people who end up absorbing the anger of strangers are rarely the ones actually responsible for the underlying tragedy. A family already grieving. A judge with no real connection to the events on that island, beyond a personal one. They're the ones catching the fallout, while the actual, verified facts of the case remain locked away, waiting on a grand jury that, as of tonight, still hasn't even convened. So, stripped of everything except what's actually confirmed, what does the public record support as of today? That genuinely depends on who you ask. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, offering her professional assessment publicly, has said that everything visible from the outside, witness statements, Coast Guard communications, and the documented weather and tide conditions around Horn Island that week, points toward a tragic accident rather than a deliberate act. She was careful to add a caveat of her own, that more information could still surface, and that any outside assessment, hers included, is built only on what's already public, which by definition is incomplete. On the other side of that read sits a family and an attorney who aren't ready to accept it as final, not because they've produced hard evidence contradicting it, but because too many smaller details, in their telling, still don't line up cleanly. Around 60 witnesses have been interviewed so far, according to investigators. Part of what makes the smaller details in this case so hard to resolve is that Nolan's final hours on the island have never been fully, consistently accounted for. By multiple accounts, witnesses' versions of that evening don't all line up cleanly with one another. That's not necessarily unusual in an investigation involving a large group of teenagers on a holiday. Memory is imperfect, timelines get compressed under stress, and people who are celebrating don't always track the exact sequence of events the way investigators later wish they had. But in a case already operating under this much public scrutiny, even ordinary inconsistency tends to get read as evidence of something more, whether or not that's fair to the people involved. Media voices, meanwhile, have weighed in from every direction. Legal commentator Nancy Grace has said publicly she isn't backing away from this story until there's a real, defensible answer. Sports commentator Stephen A. Smith used his own platform to voice what he described as broader suspicion within the black community about how quickly investigators moved to publicly rule out foul play in the first place. None of this, not Coffindaffer's read, not Grace's, not Smith's, constitutes a finding. They're informed opinions offered by people standing at very different vantage points around the exact same unresolved set of facts. And the space between "here's what probably happened" and "here's what we can actually prove" is exactly where this case has lived for nearly a month now. Professional investigators, notably, weren't the only ones searching. In the earliest days, before Nolan's body was even found, the volunteer search and rescue network, known as the Cajun Navy, mobilized to help look for him, and kept gathering tips from the public long after the search itself had ended. According to the organization, it has since compiled everything it collected: timelines, time-stamped photos, and hundreds of individual tips submitted through its website, direct messages, and email, into a full report shared directly with the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the district attorney, and Nolan's family. Organization leadership has been careful to frame that report strictly as an investigative tool, explicitly not an attempt to draw conclusions or implicate anyone. Separately, the family of one of Nolan's closest friends has offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction in his death, a striking figure and a clear signal of just how much frustration has built up around the pace of the official investigation, even among the people standing closest to Nolan himself. Looking ahead, there's no fixed timeline for any of it. Grand juries convene on their own schedule, and prosecutors have given no public date for when Nolan Wells' case will actually be presented, or when the phone evidence both sides have been negotiating over for weeks might finally get examined. Dr. Mitchell's continued search for additional tissue and photographs suggests the independent side of this investigation isn't finished either, regardless of what today's headline about the state autopsy might suggest to a casual observer. If history is any guide, cases like this one tend to move in exactly the pattern this one already has. Long stretches of silence, punctuated by press conferences that reveal just enough to keep the story alive, without ever quite delivering the single, conclusive answer everyone is actually waiting for. So where does all of this actually leave things, tonight, on the day the official autopsy finally closed its own chapter? Here's what's true, stripped of everything else. The official autopsy is finished, but sealed. The independent autopsy is finished, but inconclusive, and even its own pathologist isn't fully done reviewing it. A grand jury will eventually see everything both sides have found, and only then will the public learn whether investigators believe a crime occurred here at all. Phones that may hold some of the clearest answers are still sitting untouched, weeks after an agreement to examine them was first reached in principle. Two other families, watching their own cases unfold in the shadow of this one, are still waiting on answers of their own. What tends to keep a case like this in the national conversation for a month, and counting, usually isn't one single dramatic piece of evidence. It's the slow accumulation of small, unresolved questions that never quite resolve. A phone with missing data, a body recovered exactly where it was last seen, a first official statement that turned out to be wrong, or at least badly premature. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He should be getting ready for whatever came next after high school right now, not the subject of forensic analysis, grand jury procedure, and cable news debate. Whatever the state's sealed autopsy report ultimately says, and whenever the public is finally allowed to see it, one fact will remain exactly as true as it is tonight. A mother and a father are still waiting to be told, plainly and definitively, what happened to their son on that island. And until that day actually comes, this case, like so many before it that captured the country's attention and then quietly outlasted it, will stay exactly where it's been for weeks now. Not closed, not solved, just unresolved, and still very much being watched.